and what a day it was yesterday. The Brexit drama reached fever pitch as we approached B-Day and failed to launch. Yes, this country has not Brexited on what was the statutory Brexit day. That's now been pushed forward until April the 12th as Theresa May's meaningful vote failed in Parliament for a whopping third time. Each time, the ratings for her deal dropping lower and lower, meaning fewer and fewer parliamentarians voting for her deal every time she put it forward. And so you'd be forgiven for thinking, what on earth is she thinking? And the funny thing with this is, folks, that the Prime Minister has a very publicly stated view that it would mean to hold a second referendum on the terms of Brexit would mean not respecting the results of the first. Likewise, some of her Brexit right-wing Tory rebels, in particular among the European Research Group, also take the view that a second referendum would be disrespecting the result of the first. And so why, if that is their publicly stated stance, I ask you, do they take that view while at the same time putting forward their own vote, not once, not twice, not thrice, but now the Prime Minister saying that she will put forward her meaningful vote for potentially a fourth time before Parliament, to have parliamentarians vote on it for a fourth time. And yet somehow that's not undemocratic. That's not disrespecting the result of the first time she attempted to put forward her meaningful vote and got resoundingly rejected. Yet going to the people, going to us to ask us what we think as to whether we want Theresa May's deal, no deal, or to stay in is somehow undemocratic. And so hold on, let me get this straight. For the Prime Minister, she thinks it's okay for parliamentarians to change their minds, and for the European Research Group, led by people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, think it's okay potentially for them to change their minds. Already he's changed his mind himself. He's very close to considering Theresa May's deal. They can all change their minds when the situation changes, when the facts change, when the context changes, when the consequences of their decisions may end up being not what they initially intended, but it's somehow undemocratic for the people to be given a chance to see if we've changed our minds on Brexit 3 years later. And this is really, it points to the utter absurdity of the situation. Look, I will put my hands up and say that in this country, because Parliament is sovereign, if Parliament today voted for us to Brexit on no deal terms, on WTO rules, then I would put my hands up and say, guys, you know, as much as I love to stay in the European Union, what I love more is the sovereignty of our Parliament and the democracy of this country. And so I will do whatever Parliament says. But the thing is, here's the thing, right? Parliament hasn't done that, and it can't make its mind up. And because it can't make its mind up, and because it now may well be asked for a fourth time to decide on something, isn't it time that we all realise that just as Jacob Rees-Mogg, just as Theresa May and the European Research Group and all of those Brexiters in Parliament can expect that they're allowed to change their minds on which way to vote, whether they want to vote for Norway Plus or Canada Plus or Theresa May's deal or no deal. They've all changed because each time she's put her vote before Parliament, the meaningful vote, her Brexit deal, the arithmetic has moved, which means parliamentarians have changed their minds. And that's not undemocratic. That's what happens in a democracy. And so surely, in a referendum that wasn't binding legally in the first place, we, the people, also have the right to change our minds, considering that 3 years later, more information has presented itself, the context and the reality has changed, better facts are available, and ultimately, you know, you could put in that vote that goes to the people, you could put a sufficient threshold for a margin for victory, which wouldn't be blooming 4%. It's never 4% in anything meaningful. You could say, right, the winner has to have 60%. The way you secure that is with a transferable vote electoral system. And that way, with that transferable vote system, you could also have more than one option, more than two options on the ballot. So it doesn't just have to be a choice between stay or go. It could also be a choice between no deal, Theresa May's deal, or remain. And there wouldn't be a wasted vote because you have a transferable vote. And there you resolve the problem. Simple. because at the end of the day, Parliament cannot make its mind up. Now, there's only one thing that Parliament has a majority for at this stage, resoundingly declared a majority for, and that was in an indicative vote, in a non-binding vote. A bit like the referendum, folks, non-binding. The only thing Parliament has a majority for is that they rejected no deal. So now, to my fellow dear, beloved Brexiter listeners with whom I disagree, you're still pressing, you're pushing for no deal. Let me ask you this. You say that the referendum was democratic and to ignore that decision would be undemocratic. And yet when I say to you, Parliament voted down the no deal option, you will say to me, but that vote wasn't binding. Precisely. It wasn't binding. The parliamentary majority rejecting a no deal scenario in Brexit was not binding, which is why I'm not calling you undemocratic for still asking for a no deal. Likewise, the initial referendum wasn't binding, so don't call we Remainers undemocratic for also asking for another say over that one. At the end of the day, guys, consistency, quid pro quo. We're not calling you undemocratic for still asking for a no deal, even though Parliament rejected that scenario, because we recognise that vote, that was an indicative vote, is not binding. Likewise, your referendum that you won by a 4% margin, it was advisory. It wasn't legally binding. It doesn't matter that the Prime Minister of the day promised you to implement it, because he resigned the minute he lost that vote. If you've got a problem with that, go and find David Cameron. I wish I could. I'd ask him why he called the thing in the first place. But the point is that Cameron's no longer Prime Minister, and no executive in this country can bind Parliament, because Parliament is sovereign. Just like no past Parliament can bind a current Parliament, because Parliament is sovereign. And whatever Parliament decides, and the latest thing it decides, is law in this country. And so there we have it. It's not that difficult. If it's undemocratic, why? If it's democratic for Theresa May to put her meaningful vote before Parliament for a potentially fourth time, why is it undemocratic 3 years later for the people to have another say over what type of Brexit they like, over which deal they prefer?